What is up, maniacs? I am Zach Barger, and I am the Millie Maker Maniac. We are going to be talking about best ball strategy today. It's that time of year, one of my favorite times of year, which is preseason, starting to get into fantasy football season. It's a perfect time to jump into best ball. Best ball is a lot of fun if you haven't played before. It's a season-long tournament where you do a draft up front. You don't make any moves throughout the year. There's no trades, no waivers. Each week, your lineup is automatically optimized, and it's a cumulative point total throughout the year in both structures. So let's actually jump into different structures. When you're first looking at how you need to draft, first you need to understand what structure you're playing in. Today, we're going to be talking primarily about big tournaments. These are where it's a smaller entry fee, like the Best Ball Mania is the most common one, where you're putting in $20 to win $2 million. First place is $2 million on DraftKings, and then on Underdog, it's $25 to get into to have your shot at $2 million. Those are kind of lottery tickets, but they're a lot of fun to play, especially since it's year long. It's a lot of fun to put that investment in and give yourself a chance at big money at the end. There's smaller tournaments in 12-man leagues where the 12-man league, you're just playing with 12 people throughout the season. Obviously, much better chance at making money on that, but a much smaller prize pool. So within your strategy, when we're looking at big tournaments, which is what we're primarily going to be talking about, we're going to need to create lineups through our draft that are differentiated, as well as obviously good teams. We're not going to win anything if we don't have good teams. So we have to find ways to get a little contrarian when possible, while also building really solid squads. You need to understand the scoring. So PPR versus half PPR, or non PPR. Most best ball leagues are either PPR or half PPR. If we're looking at half point per reception, touchdown dependent players are going to be a little bit stronger there. So like a David Montgomery is somebody that's going to be a little stronger in half PPR scoring compared to PPR, just because he's going to get more touchdowns. Not as involved in the passing game there. Guys like Derrick Henry also are going to be stronger in half PPR than they are in PPR. So running back wise, you're going to want guys that score more or get more receptions in PPR. They're just going to score more points throughout the season. So it's something to be aware of when you're looking at your draft. Is what does the scoring look like? How does this player do in half PPR versus PPR? And then understand how the payouts happen. And most of the bigger tournaments, the ones we're going to be talking about today, it's cumulative scoring through weeks 1 through 14. The top two teams out of your draft room of 12 are going to advance to week 15, and then in week 15 and 16, the top team from that next group of 12 will advance to the following week. And then in week 17, there's roughly 1,000 lineups left, and then you're just paid out based on where you finish against those lineups at the end. So that's a basic breakdown of the different structures. Again, today we're going to be talking about the big tournaments because we got one goal, and that goal is to win $2 million. We're not here trying to make a couple bucks. We're here trying to get a lifestyle change. Who's with me? All right. So how do we do this? Well, this isn't rocket science. In order to win the $2 million, we first got to get to the playoffs. And when we get to the playoffs, we got to advance in week 15, and we got to advance in week 16. And when we get to week 17, we got to be the highest scoring team. So obviously that's pretty straightforward. If you've looked at the structure of any of these, you understand that that's how we got to do it to win the $2 million. But I think it's important to have that overview when we're putting together our drafts. We have to build a team that can get to the playoffs. But then most importantly, we have to have a team that when we get to week 15, 16, and 17 can go off and get us to week 17 and win that $2 million. So we'll talk about different strategies on how to get teams that are likely to both advance to the playoffs and then have a really good shot of being those boom teams that make the big money at the end. One of the things with drafting best ball, obviously, if you're watching this, you're consuming a lot of fantasy football content. I'm consuming a ton of fantasy football content. We all want to have that idea that we know what's going to happen in this season. I think one of the important things within best ball is to embrace that we really don't know the outcome of the season, right? Like we're going to take as much information as we can get to try to make the best decisions possible. But we got to embrace the chaos a little bit. Understand that there's going to be injuries that we didn't foresee. There's going to be coaching changes throughout the year. There's going to be scenarios we didn't expect as far as teams that are really successful that we really didn't see coming. I mean, last year we had Washington. Like people thought that they might, take a step up, but they made a massive jump and then made it all the way to the NFC Championship game. Um, Same for like the Buccaneers. People thought they would be solid, but Baker throwing 40 touchdowns wasn't really on people's radar. So we need to understand that going into this season, we really don't know how it's going to play out. We've got ideas. We're going to try to consume as much information as possible to give us idea of most likely outcomes, but we have to embrace some outcomes that aren't that likely. So when we're going through this, I want to answer the following questions for every player that I draft and then how it correlates to my team as well. So what does this player's week 1 through 14 look like? Is this a guy that can be top 10 at his position and is somebody that's going to score most weeks for me? Is he going to be a consistent player? Is he going to be a boom week player? And then when I answer those questions, I want to do that in kind of an optimistic way. When we're building, most of the time, the way I'm building best ball lineups is I'm building a portfolio of lineups. So I can have one draft where I'm telling a story that Christian McCaffrey is healthy year round and he's the number one running back, right? And so around that, I believe if he's going to be RB1 on the year, the 49ers are probably going to have a really great season as well. So I might want other pieces along with the 49ers along that because they're going to get a lot of yards. They're going to score a lot of touchdowns. They're likely to be in a lot of shootouts too if he's the number one running back, right? That if we're scoring a lot of points and the opposing team is going to have to be playing catch up, which is going to lead to fantasy points on the other side as well. So when we're building that, I'm going to want to add 49ers with that. I'm going to want to look at who the 49ers play in the playoffs. They play the Bears in week 17, so I might want to have some correlation plays with the Bears in week 17 in that scenario. So that one I would just be riding the stud 49ers all the way to the championship, right, to week 17. But in other lineups, like obviously I can't get Christian McCaffrey in every single draft. So in other lineups, I might be playing a scenario in which I think Christian McCaffrey does get hurt and he doesn't make it through the season. So in that, I might be drafting Isaac Garindo. So I'm telling different stories with different lineups. But when I am in a certain draft, I commit to the story that I'm telling in that draft. So if I'm doing a Christian McCaffrey lineup, I'm not playing safe and like drafting Garindo later. Like there are some scenarios where, McCaffrey could play like 13 weeks and then Garindo's a stud in the playoffs. Like I guess you could do that if that's a story that you're telling. But in most scenarios, I'm building it as if McCaffrey is going to be healthy and he's going to be a stud year round, and I'm just going to go full send with that. If he gets hurt, that lineup really didn't have a chance anyways. I'd rather have a lineup where McCaffrey's a stud year round, and then I have other handcuff guys instead of Garindo that could pop as well on top of McCaffrey being a stud year round. So answer these questions each week or for each player. Does this guy look like he's going to have a solid regular season? Is this a guy that could go off in the fantasy playoffs? So like, is this a guy that you can have guys that don't say yes to all these questions but make sense to your team. For instance, a guy like Ricky Pearsall last year. He was a guy that you needed to have in week 17, but he didn't do anything throughout the season. Or Jonathan Taylor, who didn't have a great year until we got to the best ball playoffs. So it's okay to have guys that aren't going to be, the top running back or the top quarterback, top at their positions weeks 1 through 14, but can pop off in the playoffs based on maybe matchups or, an injury in front of them, or if it's a rookie, like likely getting more experience, more touches as the season goes on, as coaches build confidence in them, or if the season is lost, they want to see what they have in the rookie, so they might give them more touches, more opportunities as we get closer to the end of the season. So we're trying to build teams where there's a logical story behind it, an outcome that could happen. It doesn't always have to be the most likely outcome, because if we just do the most likely outcome, we're going to end up with ADP builds, right? Just the ADP build that everybody else has. We won't have anything different than, there'll be many lineups that are very similar to ours, and that doesn't give us a very good chance of winning in these big tournaments. So we want to be able to tell stories that are reasonably likely, but also a little bit out of the norm of what people are saying is likely to happen. So we want to answer those optimistically. As I said, we need that best case scenario to play out if we're gonna win, right? If that best case scenario doesn't happen, we're not gonna win at best ball. So we're building towards that best case scenario. Build off of the story you're telling. If you say XYZ is gonna happen, then what else is likely to happen? So as you're building your team, does it make sense if I think this player A, is going to be a stud? Does it make sense for his teammate to be a stud as well? Like, let's think of an example here of one that if one guy goes off, the other guy likely isn't to go off. How about, running backs are easy. So like Chuba Hubbard and Rico Dowdle. If Rico has a good year, it's very unlikely that Chuba does. Chuba probably got hurt or he didn't play well. So those are two guys that I'm probably not going to have on the same team, because if I'm saying that Chuba has a great week 1 through 14 and is a stud in the fantasy playoffs, then I don't want to waste a roster spot on Rico Dowdle, because that goes against my storyline. I'm just wasting a draft spot that I could be throwing a dart at another player that in my story is likely to get more touches and be more impactful down the stretch. If I'm building a team around Chuba, I need him to be there at the end. I don't need Rico Dowdle there. So examples like that, where if one guy is going to be successful, somebody else on his team likely isn't. So don't have both of those guys on your team. Build a team that fits the story, your best case scenario. One thing we got to know, this is very important. ADP is wrong. Go back and look at last year's ADP. Saquon Barkley was in the 3rd round. Christian McCaffrey was the 1st overall pick. Like, obviously, things happened that it made sense for Christian McCaffrey to be the 1st overall pick last year. And I'm not saying don't draft Jamar Chase. That's not what I'm saying in any way. And I'm also not saying ignore ADP. But don't be so stuck on it that you're only just going to draft whoever's the best value according to ADP. Because one, you're not going to have any variance in your teams. You're not going to have any unique lineups if you're just always following ADP. You're just going to follow that same slot that everybody else that's drafting in that position has been falling into, with very little difference. We have to be different from other lineups in order to win. But it's also important to just understand that we need to be worried more about our story than how we're ranking guys. Our goal is to not build a lineup that has the best ranks, right? Like last year, if you had Josh Allen, Saquon Barkley, Jamar Chase, those were obviously absolute studs, and they probably got you to week 17. But those weren't the guys that you needed in week 17. So we don't just having the top guys at every position doesn't mean you're going to win. That's not even the goal. The goal is to build a team that gets to the playoffs and then wins in week 17. So we don't need to be so stuck in ADP. ADP is a guide for us to look at how do we need to make these picks to build the team we want. We're going to talk about how to create a plan as we're going through this draft. And part of that sometimes is hoping that guys fall to you, and other times it's reaching for guys according to ADP. But when you look at your roster construction at the end, it's the strongest team. It gives you the best chance to win. So don't be so stuck on ADP that you're not willing to go, sometimes a round or even 2 rounds farther down the list to get the guy that makes your lineup stronger, that gives you the best chance to win at the end. It's important to understand that only 8 players a week can hit your lineup. That's it. If you have 12 guys that are top 10 at their position, that doesn't do you any good that week, right? Now, obviously, we would love to have the 12 guys that are top 10 at their position every single week because that means we're probably going to advance the playoffs, and those are points that other teams aren't scoring and aren't getting to hit their lineup. But the reason I mention this is people are so scared to draft guys like a Bayshell Tootin, right? Like obviously he is not a guy that's probably going to get a lot of run early on in the season. It's probably going to be Tank Bigsby and Travis Etienne early in the year. But he's a guy that could definitely be like the Ricky Pearsall of running backs as the season goes on. Maybe there's an injury, maybe there's fumble issues, maybe he's just showing out in practice. Maybe he's just good and he's earning more playing time. Uh, so those are guys that I'm okay with taking a zero, weeks 1 through 8, as long as I have guys that can hit my lineup in those weeks. I'm okay with him taking zeros like early throughout the year if he's going to be a guy that could be a stud late in the year. So don't be afraid of having guys that are questionable and in training camp right now are fourth on the depth chart. But if they're a guy that you've read up on, that all the scouts are very much in love with, he's got some buzz in training camp, but he's just stuck way back on the depth chart. Don't be afraid of those guys. Those are the guys that can win you a best ball tournament. So it's okay to have zeros. Don't be afraid of those zeros. The goal is just to get to the finish line and to win. So just to reinforce all that, we're using ADP as a framework to build our team throughout the draft. It's not the answer to the test, though. We know that it's wrong. So go into it knowing that and don't be stuck to it. We're not worried about zeros. Zeros are okay. We don't want zeros to hit our lineup. We got to make sure we make eight players that are going to be solid each week. But if, we have 4 or 5 guys on our bench that are zeros, but we still have a solid 8 guys in, it doesn't matter. Okay. We're building for getting to the playoffs. And then when we get to the playoffs, winning. We want that late season upside. We're chasing that late season upside with a balanced team that's going to get us to the playoffs. And just to reinforce this, look at these guys that were top 10 at their position in week 17. Drew Lock, obviously that's a guy that no one would draft it and wasn't in anybody's best ball lineups when we got there to the end. But, there's these quarterbacks. Like this year's Drew Lock could be, somebody like Shedeur Sanders or Jalen Milroe or, some of these rookies that probably aren't going to start early but might get a shot later in the year. That could be somebody late in drafts that we could draft. That could be somebody like a Drew Lock week 17 that really don't do anything for us throughout the year, but then are studs in week 17. Jonathan Taylor, he's a guy that obviously everybody drafted, but he disappointed throughout the year. Not a lot of teams with Jonathan Taylor made it to the playoffs, but if they did, he blew up. So if guys have early season struggles, that's not the end of it. Or if we don't think that they're somebody that's going to have a great year, but there's somebody capable of having those boom games, those are still guys we want to target. We want to build a balanced team of guys that could have those boom games with guys that are consistent and are going to hit our lineup consistently, again, giving us that best likelihood of getting to the playoffs. When we get to the playoffs, they have that upside of going off, being that one guy that you have to make it to the next week. Guys like Amir Abdullah, he went off in week 17. Obviously, nobody had him, but the idea of this is he's a backup running back that if there's injuries in front of him, what like there were, got touches. He was on nobody's radar because I don't even think he was on the team at the beginning of the year. But just that archetype is somebody that we can be on the lookout for, of somebody that could be solid down the stretch. Guys like Jalen Warren, J.K. Dobbins, these aren't guys that we drafted as studs. We were drafting more as handcuffs or kind of like dart throws, right? J.K. Dobbins was a guy that had a solid year all year long when he was healthy, and then had that boom game in week 17. So, there's guys in similar situations to J.K. Dobbins this year. Like, um, Nick Chubb might be that guy. He could be a guy that, coming off injury, a bit older, probably isn't in his prime anymore. But if uh, we find out Joe Mixon is out, if he ends up missing extended time and then gets hurt when he comes back, which is possible for an older running back like that, which is also possible for Chubb as well. But Chubb is the guy that, maybe we see some flashes again just because of all the opportunities getting. He could be someone like that. Um, and then I think last year we kind of had a weird year in that really there were very few injuries to workhorse running backs, and that's uncommon. So I think when we look back at week 17 in 2025, there's probably going to be a good chunk of rookies or second year running backs that got opportunities due to injuries that are become studs. Like it's probably somebody out of the if Kyron were to get hurt, someone out of the Rams backfield, whether it's Corum or Jarquez Hunter, like one of those two guys could be a stud late in the year. Or if someone like Bijan went down, Tyler Algier would be a huge pick that could definitely have a ton of potential for late in the playoffs. So those late round running backs, we're looking for guys that could also could have standalone value, whether it's a split backfield, um, or they're just like a third down back. They're going to get some passing game work, things along those lines, or somebody that if there were an injury is going to step in and just get a ton of volume. Those are guys that can be league winners. Those are guys that we're looking for that could be zeros for a good chunk of the year, but then be studs down the stretch. We look at these wide receivers. Last year, we had Marvin Mims, who really was a nobody until week 14 through 18. Those are the guys we're looking for. So it's younger wide receivers. Those are guys that could break out later in the year. Same with Ricky Pearsall. So like this year, I think a really good comp to that is, Mims could be that guy again. He's still going, like in the 10th round or so. He's a weird one because he doesn't get a lot of snaps at wide receiver. It doesn't run a ton of routes, but he has a ton of explosive plays. So he's definitely somebody that probably isn't going to be consistent, but somebody that could pop off. But I think somebody that's like similar to a Ricky Pearsall this year could be someone like Luther Burden, who's got a lot of people in front of him. He's got DJ Moore. He's got Roma Dunze. He's got the first round tight end in Colston Loveland. They have a lot of guys around them. They got running backs they want to get the ball to. But late in the year, I think there's a good chance that they're probably out of the playoff hunt. It's just such a tough division. I think there's going to be some growing pains with Caleb in the new offense this year. I think he'll be much better as the year goes on. But there's a chance that they'll be out of it that time of year. And if that's the case, they're probably going to want to see what they have in their young guys. So guys like Luther Burden is somebody that could be getting a lot more volume towards the end of the year, and could be a guy just like Ricky Pearsall, who they wanted to see what they had at the end of the year when they were out of it, that blew up in week 17 and was a league winner. And then you got guys like Thielen and Pittman, who are just reliable vets that are guys that could always go off for a big game. They both struggled with injuries last year, so they weren't studs throughout the year. But those are like the archetype of guys that can go off, guys that are reliable, guys that can get a lot of targets and can score touchdowns. And then guys, when we look at tight ends, we have a few. We have like a kind of a no-name in fantasy and Tyler Conklin that went off. We had guys like Zach Ertz, who was solid year-round, but was kind of a surprise when we look back at draft season last year. And Pitts, who was a disappointment throughout the year last year, but was a stud in week 17. So the reason I show you all these guys is just to give you a realization that the studs that were studs all year long weren't necessarily guys that you had to have in week 17. So we need a team that's balanced with studs that are going to get us there, with guys that could boom, guys that there's scenarios that make sense for them to be very successful in week 17. And part of that is also just looking at matchups in week 17, getting an idea for who has a really good matchup in week 17, what position group that could go off in week 17. It's like one that I really kind of in love with right now are the Buccaneers. I think they'll probably have a little bit of a regression from their offense last year with losing Liam Cohen, and everything just ran really well for them last year. But they play the Dolphins in week 17. I think the Dolphins could have one of the worst secondaries in the league, like historically bad secondary. Um, but there's a chance that they score a lot of points. If the Dolphins are still in it, like if they're hovering around that like 9-8 range, or at that time I guess 8-8, and maybe have a shot again in the playoffs, that game could be an absolute shootout. So that's I'm targeting like guys all pass catchers for the Bucks because I think that could be a game that goes off. So even guys like Jalen McMillan, who's going to be like a later round pick, if there's injuries to Godwin or Evans, which is something that's definitely possible when they're 30 plus years old and have had a few injuries throughout their careers. Like they're guys that definitely could be struggling in week 17 or might not be around. That could open up opportunities for other guys on that team. So those are the type of scenarios that we're talking through, we're thinking through of, well, this is something that isn't necessarily the most likely outcome, but it's something that could happen. And if that does happen, what are the likely outcomes in that scenario? And we're building the team to match all these different scenarios that we're building. Again, it's kind of a crapshoot, but if we're building, I mean, I built over 400 drafts now, and each one has a little unique story. All we need is one of those stories that is reasonable to come to fruition and be the winner. So some other guidelines as we're going through this, just some basic guidelines. Let the draft come to you. So you're going to listen to a lot of podcasts where people are like talking about different strategies such as, hero RB, zero RB, elite quarterback, elite tight end, punt quarterback, punt tight ends, um, robust running back. Like there's a lot of different builds that you can go through, and there's a lot of data behind, which ones are most successful. But I think the reality is there's a winning lineup that could be built through all of those different avenues, whether it's hero RB or um, zero RB, whatever it may be. Like last year, zero RB historically has been a strategy that tends to advance. Uh, but last year it wasn't. It was you want to have an advance rate above 18%, 1 out of 12 or 2 out of 12 gets you to that 18%. If you want to be higher than that 18% advance rate, so zero RBs last year were below that. I think it was something around 14%. I'd have to look that back up, but it was lower than that because we had kind of an outlier year with running backs being studs. So I think the market is kind of shifting towards everybody going towards more robust running back because that was what was successful last year. I want to have builds that are balanced, I have some zero RB, I have some hero RB, I have some robust running back. Basically, however the draft falls to me, I feel comfortable building a successful team in all of those scenarios. I can build a really good hero RB. I can build a really good zero RB. I can build an elite QB lineup that's going to be solid. Because I've done so many drafts and because I've, put in the work, I can navigate all of those different uh, builds. But what I really don't want to do is go into a draft and be like, I'm going to do a hero RB draft here, and then I reach, if say I'm pick 8 and Barkley, Gibbs, Bijan, McCaffrey, Genty, they're all gone, and I'm sitting there and I could take like a CD Lamb or a Justin Jefferson because they've fallen, or even a Puka or a Malik, and say it's a half PPR. Like if it's PPR, I could see the argument for um, pulling up like a Devon Achan or something like that. But I think the better value there is if you can get like a CD Lamb or um, a Justin Jefferson at pick 8. Like that's the better value there. So the draft is dictating, okay, this isn't going to be necessarily a hero RB with my first pick. I'm just going to take the best player. and I'll adjust as I go through that draft. Now, um, the most common build I do have is Hero RB, but that where I'm taking a running back in the first or second round, and then not really hitting running back until lots of times round 10 or later, and just kind of putting a whole bunch of dart throws together for that RB2 spot. But I'm not going into a draft dictating what build I'm going to do. If a if there's value that falls to me that I like and it fits my story, I'm going to take that and then I'm going to build around that. Now, when it's very important that we understand that early in the draft, like we don't need to be a hero with our stances on players. Like for the most part, with picks one through honestly picks 1 through 18, I want to have pretty even percentages of all of those guys. What I'm looking to do is kind of mix those combinations because what's most likely is the guy that you have to have in fantasy, the guy that is last year's Saquon Barkley, even though Saquon was out of that range last year, or last year's Jamar Chase, he's a better example because he was in that range. They're likely in those picks, right? Like, obviously, we have all sorts of information on these guys. We can take our stances on who we think is the most likely to be number one at that position, as well as be the guy that's going to go off in week 17. But even when we have a really educated guess, that educated guess is a percentage, right? Like if we talk about what's the percentage of Jamar Chase being wide receiver one again, like I'd say that percentage is probably around 40% when we talk about all the outcomes. Like, you know, there's there hasn't been a guy to repeat as wide receiver one in a long time. I don't know the exact time, but I think it was early 2000s was the last time. I think it was Antonio Brown was the last time that occurred. So it's just not a common thing to have guys repeat as wide receiver one. Not to say that obviously Jamar Chase is built different. He very much could be wide receiver one again this year, but it's not 100% that he's going to be that. And I'm not saying don't take Jamar Chase with the first overall pick. Like pretty much the only time you're ever going to get Jamar Chase is pick one. So I'm taking Jamar Chase with pick one. But what I'm saying is we don't really want to have like, you know, I don't want to go crazy. If say I do like Christian McCaffrey this year. I think he's going to bounce back. He looks good in camp, all that good stuff. But I don't want to be taking McCaffrey with the second pick. Maybe here and there to kind of get contrarian with some of my lineups because you're not going to have a lot of lineups that were built from the two spot that have Christian McCaffrey in it. So it could be a unique way to get get a guy like McCaffrey that does end up being a stud and have it with a lineup that's very unique compared to other Christian McCaffrey lineups. It gives you a good chance of being the winning lineup there at the end. But I don't want to do that a ton, right? Like I don't want to have 40% Christian McCaffrey in comparison to having 3% Bijan Robinson. Like I don't want that. I want to be pretty even across all those guys because all those guys are very capable in those first couple of rounds of being the dude you have to have. We just don't know exactly who that is. We have our, you know, our intuition and a lot of research that goes into who we think that's going to be. But there's so many things that can happen to those guys that are completely out of their control. You know, like look at CD Lamb last year. Like CD was the wide receiver one as far as drafts go last year. And then he loses Dak Prescott for a huge portion of the season and gets injured. None of that necessarily was in his control. And like the decision-making process we had to make him wide receiver one still made sense, but that's not how it played out. There's going to be, again, we have to embrace that chaos. We know that there's going to be a lot of scenarios like that. So let's not pigeonhole ourselves into picking just one of those studs and going really heavy on him. Let's give ourselves a spread out opportunity, different combinations of two of those studs up front that could be the guy. And then let's build around those. Again, ask our story. If CD Lamb is wide receiver one this year, what else does that mean for the people around him? That probably means that Dak Prescott's having a really good year. Does that mean that maybe if we want to stack him up with Dak later, when we think about, well, what's Dak's best case scenario? Could Dak throw 40 touchdowns? For sure. Is that the most likely outcome? No, but we're not building towards the most likely outcome. We're building towards an outcome that could win us the Millie Maker, right? Get us that $2 million. If we have CD Lamb and Dak throws 40 touchdowns in our story, who else do we want on that team? If Dak throws 40 touchdowns, they're not all going to CD. There's definitely going to be some George Pickens boom games there. So if I take CD early and I decide that CD's wide receiver one and that Dak is going to have an MVP like season, I'm also going to want to have George on that team. So once we like start to get a feel, we're going to let the draft come to us. We're going to pick studs as they fall to us, kind of mix up combinations. Think about combinations you've had of those two studs, of your studs in your first two picks. And like I'm totally cool with repeating different combinations, but I want to give myself a variety of those combinations. But once I establish those first couple picks, then I want to start thinking about my plan moving forward. Who else do I want on this team? If CD goes off and Dak goes off, who are other guys that I want to have on that team? Who are opponents? Like, so they play Washington in week 17. If that week 17 game is the highest scoring game and Dak and CD are, and Pickens are, I mean, there's definitely scenarios in which where Pickens and Lamb can both be top 5 in the same week and Dak can throw, 4 or 5 touchdowns, have that massive week. If he has that type of week, that type of game is probably going to be a shootout. So that means there's going to be points on that other side that we want to get as well. So who could go off for the Commanders? You could have a big game from, obviously Terry McLaurin is the one that jumps out. You could have Brian Robertson could have one of those games where he falls in the end zone 3 times, right? Like he has a 3 touchdown game. He's a guy that might not be a stud all year long, but could be a guy that goes off in week 17, or even somebody like Austin Eckler or Zach Ertz or Noah Brown. So when I think about, okay, I decide the Cowboys are going to have a great year, and I decide that they're the team I need to have in the playoffs, and specifically week 17. In that scenario, I believe that game is going to be a shootout. So who do I want from the other side? That's the plan I'm starting to put together as I get those initial picks. Who else do I want on this team? If this scenario I've constructed happens, who else is likely to go off? So as we're doing that, we also want to start creating our plan for QB. By round 6-ish, I want to have a pretty good idea of who I'm picking. Obviously, by round 6, we could also have a QB. We could have, a Lamar or, the other elite QBs with Jaden Daniels, Josh Allen, and Jalen Hurts. I would consider those guys the elite QBs. And then Burrow would be just outside of that. I love getting Burrow in the 6th, but we'll talk more about that here in a bit. So as we're building, know when it's okay to reach, know when it's okay to push. So I'll give you an example of a guy that I love to push, and that's Joe Burrow. Just mentioned him a little bit ago. So here's a very common thing that happens. So Jamar Chase, he's going to pick 1, right? You'll look at the ADPs, and you'll see that right around pick 24 and 25, which are the last pick in the second round and the first pick in the third round, T. Higgins and Chase Brown are right there. And you also have Trey McBride and Marvin Harrison hanging out in that same range. That's because the Bengals play the Cardinals in week 17. So a ton of people are stacking Jamar with T or Jamar with Chase, or in some cases, I've got a few lineups like this that are pretty sweet. They're stacking Jamar Chase, Chase Brown, and T. Higgins all together, or they're doing Higgins and McBride or Higgins and Harrison to try to get some correlation for that week 17 game. And then they're taking Burrow at the 4-5 turn, right? You'll see Burrow's ADP on Underdog is right around 60, which is right in between uh, pick five, the first pick in the fifth round, and the last pick of the sixth round. And the reason for that is if Burrow doesn't go at the 4-5 turn, nobody really wants to take him unstacked because an unstacked pocket quarterback like that, if he's QB1, you almost guaranteed have to have, excuse me, whoever his top pass catcher is, his top scoring player on his team. So if Joe Burrow goes for 404 touchdowns, what's very likely to happen is either Jamar Chase or T. Higgins, or maybe both of them, are top 5 at their position and very likely number 1 at their position that week. So if we get to week 17 and Joe Burrow is indeed QB1, pretty likely you're going to have T. Higgins and Jamar Chase or one of the other on your team, or even a Mike Gesicki. Maybe he's the guy that went off. But you're going to need a piece to go with him in order to win. Now, guys like Josh Allen or Lamar Jackson or Jaden Daniels, they can have those big weeks, and you don't have to have a guy with them. Like they'll more than likely have a teammate that's top 10 at their position, but it might be like, they might be the 10th wide receiver, and you don't have to have that guy in order to have the winning lineup because they do so much with their legs. They can score a ton of fantasy points. They can score, 20 fantasy points just with their legs and then have maybe 10 or 15 through the air. But in those scenarios, there isn't a guy that you had to have with them. But with Burrow, that's not the case. Burrow, he's a guy that's not going to probably score many rushing touchdowns. He's not going to have many rushing yards. He's a guy that when he scores points, other guys are scoring points with him. So all that being said, I love if I'm pick like 2 or 3 with my second round pick to take a T. Higgins or take a Chase Brown, somebody that I want to get a little bit of that Bengals stack. And then I won't take Burrow in the 4th or the 5th. If the guy with the first pick decides not to take Burrow and stack him up with Chase at the 4-5, or even if I am that first pick, I'm not going to take Burrow at the 4-5. I've had a couple of scenarios. It's pretty sweet where I have Chase, I have Jamar Chase, Chase Brown, and T. Higgins. I get the full stack, and then at 4-5, I don't take Burrow. I get 2 other guys that could be studs at the 4-5. Like there's a lot of value at that 4-5 turn. I get 2 more guys, and then I dare the room. I dare the room to take Joe Burrow on stack. Dare you to do it. Because sure, he'll have plenty of weeks throughout the year where he hits your lineup and he helps you score, but you do not have a team that can win in week 17 if Joe Burrow is QB1. It just can't happen. There's no way that can happen because if Joe Burrow is QB1, T. Higgins or Jamar Chase or even Chase Brown is going to be that top 3 guy at their position that you have to win, right? So I dare the rest of the room to take him. And many, many times I've got him to fall all the way to the very end of round 6, almost round 7. Like if I'm pick 1, I've actually taken him in round 7 with the first pick just to say I got Burrow in round 7. But the other thing is if you take Higgins at 2 or 3, and the guy at the first pick doesn't take Burrow at the 4-5 turn, then you're going to be 1 pick in front of the Jamar Chase owner at the end of round 6. So you can snipe Burrow at the end of round 6 and have that Burrow Higgins stack, which was actually the better stack in week 17 last year. Chase, I think, was wide receiver 6 or 7 in week 17 last year, but Higgins was wide receiver 2. So, yeah, I love doing that stack. So that's an example of when I want to push. Now, an example of when I want to reach is uh, when you're at the turns, the turns, you're going to have to reach a lot more than when you're like at pick 6 or 7, um, because guys are more likely to fall to you when there's 24 picks between when you take a pick and the next pick when you're at the turn. So you're gonna have to reach a little bit more on those scenarios. I want to reach for um, guys that I have to have for my story to make sense. So if I'm building, let's say I'm building a 49ers lineup and I have a really a stack that I really love is um, McCaffrey and Kittle, and then either Pearsall or Jawan Jennings, one or the other. If I have that team and that team's going to go off, like Purdy is going to be solid if that team is like if the 49ers are a top 5 scoring fantasy offense and I have Purdy to add to that, like I'm going to have a ton of scenarios in which Purdy's a top 10 QB and two of those guys and sometimes three of those guys are top 10 at their position, and I'm for each touchdown that he throws, I'm scoring twice. I love those scenarios, right? So if I believe that the 49ers are going to be a top 5 scoring offense, I really want to have Purdy. If I'm at a turn, say I'm at um, roughly pick 100, he's hovering around 105 or so. I'm going to reach and I'm going to go get Brock Purdy in that scenario at the turn. Now, if I'm at in that same scenario, if I'm say I'm like the 6th pick, so I'm like right in the middle, and I have 3 of those 49ers, if I can like if he's his ADP at the time is 103, and I have pick just this I don't know if the math checks out on this, but say I have pick 90 and then pick 108 or something along those lines. At pick 90, I'm not going to reach for him because I think there's a really good chance that he falls to 108 because there's not going to be anybody else that has anybody to stack him with. There might be one guy that has either Pearsall or Jennings, but they're probably not going to reach for Purdy to just stack him with one wide receiver. So in that scenario, I can let him fall a little bit. But if I'm at the turn and he's at 105, but my next pick is into 124 and I'm at 100, I'm going to reach to go get him because that makes my team really, really tough if the scenario that I built out, which is the 49ers are a top 5 scoring fantasy offense, I really want to have Purdy. That makes my team stronger than if I take whoever ADP says at that moment. Another general guideline that I try to go with is I try to have 5 wide receivers by pick 100. Basically, I think that there's a massive drop off. I think Michael Pittman is the last guy that I really like wide receiver wise, and I think his ADP right now is right around 90. But in general, I want to have 5 wide receivers before pick 100. If you've done any of these drafts, you know how much it sucks trying to chase wide receivers in the last 10 rounds because they're dart throws that aren't that likely to have a big year. Like there's guys there that could have a big week. Like they might be a guy that could be a stud in the playoffs, like have a week here or there, but they're real dart throws. So I want to have wide receiver is a position where you in both DraftKings and Underdog, there's 3 starting wide receiver spots, and wide receiver is much more inconsistent than the running back position as far as weekly production. Um, like when you look through even guys like Jamar Chase, like there's I think roughly 6 games that he finished outside top 20 last year. So there's weeks that even your stud wide receivers aren't going to hit. So you're going to want to have a chunk of solid producing wide receivers. And I think after a pick 100, there's basically guys that are just dart throws. So you're going to want to have 5 of those guys by pick 100. I try to make that happen in every single draft. It doesn't always happen, but it's something that I try to make a priority. So just be aware of that. We're going for upside late as we're getting in going into rounds 14 and later, we're looking for guys that could have boom games or could have breakout seasons. So, lots of times that revolves around youth. Lots of times that revolves around age in front of them. So if there's like an older vet in front of them, uh, old vets are guys that unfortunately injuries happen to a lot. So going after guys that could get a big uptick in production or opportunities when the guy in front of them goes down, those are guys that we want to go after. Now, as we're creating these plans, it's inevitable that we're going to have plenty of plans that don't happen. Part of the luck in best ball is not only your team producing throughout the year, but it's how the draft falls to you, right? Like, I've had tons of scenarios where it's like I'm on my way to build this perfect team with this perfect scenario that I've built out, and then the guy I want that's going to like be the final piece to this perfect stack or this perfect team gets sniped right in front of me. Now, when those scenarios happen, we have to adjust. Okay. That story that we were going to tell with that pick isn't there anymore. It's that story is not the one we're telling anymore. We have to adjust. We have to tell a new story. So when that happens, don't panic. Just look at your team and look at the guys available. And then then start building. What is the most likely scenario for a solid season? What is the most likely scenario for that guy I need to have in week 17 that complements my team? Again, I'm not trying to take guys that are unlikely to have success if another guy on my team has success and vice versa, right? Like I want scenarios that make sense where one guy on my team has success leading to someone else on the team likely having successes as well. So that can be correlation plays. That can be, guys that play each other in week 17, or that can be teammates that, like I like to stack pass catchers with quarterbacks where they might not both have a great week, but if my quarterback has a solid season, they're one of those guys is likely going to hit my lineup. One of those guys is likely going to be a stud, and in some cases, two of those guys can be studs. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about stacking. Why would we want to have teammates on the same team? Well, when a quarterback finishes top 5, I did some correlation charting for every single week in 2024. I'm going to be doing a lot of charting this year. I'm going to be charting number of players coming out of the top scoring game each week and just get more percentages like this. But I started with last year going through and looking at what happened when a player was a top 5 QB. What did that mean for their teammates? So when a quarterback finished top 5, they had a teammate finish top 10 at their position 89% of the time. At least one teammate, 89% of the time. So going back to my Joe Burrow scenario, Joe Burrow's a guy that when he was top 5, he 100% of the time had a teammate that was top 10 at their position. So if I know that's true and I'm looking at my week 17 outcomes, and in that outcome, I'm probably going to need my quarterback to be the top scorer that week. Like he's going to have to be QB 1 or 2 for me to have a chance at winning the 2 million. Well, if I know that I'm building that scenario in which he is that guy, well, I know at least one of his teammates is probably going to be top 10 and somebody I'm going to have. And with pocket passers, it's even more common that 2 or more of their teammates are top 10 at their position, 47% of the time. Now, and this is every single week. I didn't just do this for week 17. I did this through week 1 through 18 to get these numbers. So that's happening throughout the whole year. So if I like to build 3 QB builds where I have 3 QBs that are stacked up with teammates. So I have 3 different offenses that if they have success, I'm likely going to have 2, 3, sometimes even 4 of those guys hit my lineup. We look back at like some of the big games last year. Like there's a week where the the I think it was when the Lions played the Jaguars where they just went off. They scored like 50 points, and the winning lineup in DraftKings that week had six had six Lions in it. Like that's crazy. Like that's definitely an outlier. But we're trying to chase fantasy points. And to do that, we can chase really good offenses. If you have multiple players on offenses that are going to score a lot of points, you're probably going to score a lot of fantasy points. They're going to get a lot of yards, they're going to get a lot of touchdowns. Those players on those teams are going to have really good years. Another interesting thing is when those big games happen, they tend to be shootouts. So we'll skip down to the bottom bullet point here. 70% of the time, when a QB finished top five, an opponent, so the team that they're playing, had a positional player in the top 10 70% of the time. That just makes sense. If it's a high scoring game, like right, when we look at why somebody is top five QB, generally speaking, like if a team just comes out and starts dominating and they take a 21-0 lead, what's going to happen in those scenarios? Most of the time, they're going to run the ball a lot more in the second half. They're going to slow down the pace of play. They're just trying to run clock, right? So they're going to get less offensive plays. There's probably going to be less scoring. So you can have a QB that comes out on fire, throws for 200 yards and 2 touchdowns in the first half, but they might only throw for like 50 more yards and might not get another touchdown in the second half. But if that quarterback, so they could be like, they could finish like top 10 in that scenario, but they might not finish top 5. Lots of times the top 5 QB finishes tend to be in which it's a back and forth game where the other team is scoring a lot of points and they got to keep moving the offense. They got to keep scoring points in order to win that game. And when that happens, that means that there's points being scored on the other side as well. And that's why we see this 70% number from an opponent. Now, here's another interesting thing. When you think quarterback, he's a top 5 quarterback. If he's going to have a teammate score top 10 at their position, we all think, obviously, it's going to be a wide receiver, right? Like Jamar, if it's Joe Burrow again, we'll talk about Burrow again, it's got to be Jamar or T. That's not true. That's the most common one, but it's only 54% of the time is that player a wide receiver. Number 2 is actually tight end. I love correlating and stacking my QBs with tight ends because when the tight end goes off, it's almost always going to lead to it very generally correlates to that quarterback having a big week when the tight end scores. 54% of the time it was wide receiver. So obviously we want to stack quarterbacks with wide receivers, but it's not just wide receivers and tight ends. 37% of the time it's a running back. Almost 40% of the time that teammate that goes off when the QB goes off is a running back. And let's just think about this logically. When quarterbacks are scoring a lot of points, that means they're moving the ball. We're getting into scoring position a lot. Like we're getting a lot of yards. So quarterbacks can obviously throw the ball at running back, but if the offense is moving, they probably have a balanced approach that's going really well. They're probably able to run the ball pretty well. That's leading to play action. That's leading to those big plays. And so the running back could easily have that 100-yard and score 2 TDs, maybe 100 yards running, maybe 50 yards receiving, maybe a running touchdown and a receiving touchdown. Right? Like that makes logical sense. Like that's an outcome that we see happen a decent amount of the time, but we don't see people stack quarterback with their running back nearly enough. So what I'm looking for when I'm building these lineups, I'm trying to, as the draft falls to me, I'm deciding who are these 3 or 4 offenses that I'm going to chase, that I'm going to try to get as much of that offense as I can. If I have an offense, if I could tell you right now that the highest scoring team, the team that's going to score the most points in week 17 is the Dallas Cowboys. How are you going to build your lineup? Oh, you're going to try to get CD in the first round, and then you're going to try to get George Pickens in the 3rd or the 4th, and then you're going to get Dak Prescott. Yeah, obviously, and probably add Jake Ferguson in there. Now, they're one that I kind of like avoiding the running back position because I think there's a really good chance that the running back that is running for them in week 17 is currently not on the roster. So I'm not going to tell you to go draft Javonte Williams or, God forbid, Miles Sanders. But what I am saying there is if we know the outcome is that the Cowboys are the team that's going to score the most in week 17, and let's just say they're also a top 5 scoring fantasy offense this year, what would you want to do? You would want to have as the biggest percentage of that offense as possible, right? If I could have 80% of the touches in that offense, I'm probably going to have a really good team, right? So what I'm trying to do is I'm building all sorts of different lineups where I'm assuming that that is the outcome. Say it's the Jaguars lineup. If I think the Jaguars are going to score the most points in week 17 and I think they're going to have a really good season, I'm going to try to build lineups with Brian Thomas, Travis Hunter, Travis Etienne. That's a running back room that I'm more willing to take shots on all 3 of those guys. One of them, because I think that there's probably a guy that is the stud in week 17. I think they'll probably all have moments throughout the year, but one of those guys is likely to go off, or is more than likely to go off in week 17. I think there's probably not 2 guys that you want that week. There's probably 1 guy. So I'm going to, in different lineups, have one of those guys. But then I can also add Brenton Strange. I got Trevor Lawrence late. Like, is it out of the realm of possibilities that the Jaguars are the Buccaneers of last year, especially since they have their offensive coordinator as their head coach now? No, like that is a possibility that could occur. Is that the most likely scenario? No, but we're not building towards the most likely scenario because everybody else is building to that. And the most likely scenario never happens. That's not how it plays out. We have no idea how this season's going to be. When we get to the end of the year, there's going to be teams that were like, damn, I did not see that coming. So embrace that and then commit to that crazy story you're telling that is a reasonable outcome, but not the most likely, and go for it. What I love to do because of these stats that I know here is I try to build roughly 3 or 4 offenses and have all 3 of those quarterbacks that I want there. So as I'm going through this, as I'm getting my first few picks, I'm starting to build out what my quarterback room is going to look like and who else I'm going to be adding, so I can get these crazy numbers like this and be consistent throughout the year, as well as have a really good shot at the boom game in week 17. Here. So I hit on all these. We'll just quickly go through the bullet points. When offenses go off, you're likely to have multiple players in the top 10. Obviously, more fantasy points when that happens. Teams and players will be more consistent on good teams. Makes sense, right? Like we talk about it. If a team is averaging, 25 points a game, they're going to score a lot of touchdowns. They're going to score a lot of fantasy points. We want players on those teams. Good teams score a lot of points, giving more opportunities to players to break out. It's obvious, right? It makes sense. Like when we look at breakout players, many, many times those breakout players that came out of nowhere are players on really good offenses. They got opportunities in good situations. That's what we're looking for. It also reduces our risk, right? If we have, 2 or 3 pass catchers on a team that's really solid, we're like, for instance, let's go back to our Cowboys example. If I have both CeeDee Lamb and George Pickens, CeeDee Lamb is not going to be a top 10 performer every single week, right? Like, obviously, no. There's going to be weeks he finishes out of the top 20. You know what's really likely in those weeks that he's outside the top 20? There's a really good chance that George Pickens is in the top 20, right? Like we would say it's very unlikely for both of those guys to be out of the top 20. Like there's probably it'd be very rare for Dak to have less than 200 yards passing, right? So if there's 200 yards out there, and we have Lamb, we have Pickens, and we have Ferguson, like pretty much every single week, one of those guys is going to be top 10. It's very unlikely we're going to run into many scenarios in which that's not the case. So that's another reason to stack. We lower our risk throughout the season. And two, when injuries happen, like say CD goes down, if we're in a regular league, who's everybody going to be wanting to trade for? They're going to want to have Pickens, right? So we limit our risk to injury as well when we're stacking pass catchers in particular, because those targets have to go somewhere else. So not only does it give us a better chance at boom weeks, because if that QB goes off, he's probably bringing along, especially if his pocket quarterback, he's probably bringing along two guys to be in the top 10, meaning we're going to have a huge week. And a big reason of all of this is if we have a quarterback stacked with guys that catch touchdown passes, we get to score twice on one play. That touchdown that's worth 6 for your receiver is worth 10 for me and my quarterback, right? For my quarterback and my receiver, I get to score twice on that one play. There's only a certain amount of touchdowns each week. If I can have 4 times where I score twice with touchdowns in a week because my quarterback scores 4 TDs, I'm going to have a big week. So why would we want to avoid stacks? We want to try to build really strong stacks. We're looking for good opportunities, and we're building scenarios in which, that offense is going to have a great year. If that offense does have a great year, and like one that I really like is the Falcons. Now, you're never going to get a Bijan and Drake London stack. If you do, actually, I think I got it one time. It was really awesome, but it's very unlikely that you're going to get that stack. But you could get a Drake London, a Darnell Mooney, a Kyle Pitts, and even throw a Ray McLeod in there. Is it the most insane thing to say that Penix could have a 40 touchdown year? Like, yes, it's low likelihood, right? Low likelihood. But I think there's a 10% chance, maybe 5% chance that Penix is a stud. Like, he seems like he's a bit of a gunslinger. He seems confident. Like, we don't know. We didn't think that Jaden Daniels was going to be as good as he was last year. There's a scenario in which that happens. And if I have a stack and that does happen, think about how strong that team's going to look both in the playoffs and throughout the year. So, and again, let's look at the other scenario that, like, I'm talking very optimistically about Michael Penix. Like, it's very unlikely that he throws 40 touchdowns. I'm not building a Michael Penix stack in every single lineup. I've got a ton of different lineups, and in some of those lineups, it's very anti-Falcon. Like, I might have any Falcons. So I guess the give and take that I'm giving there is like, okay, so the where I'm creating safety for myself, where I'm giving myself outs to the scenario I'm building where the Falcons are studs, is I'm building plenty of other lineups where the Falcons suck. I have nothing to do with the Falcons. So I commit to this idea in one lineup, but in a different lineup, I'll go completely against what I said in that other lineup, right? And so one of those lineups is just going to suck. If this Falcons suck and I have lineups where the Falcons are studs in it, well, those aren't my winning lineups. But I'm going to have plenty of other lineups with different offenses that do overperform, and every single one of those players are going to outperform their ADP on those teams. When you have a team that goes from being like the 20th fantasy point scoring offense in the league to a team that is top 5 in the league. Like, there is likely to be a team that makes that jump this year. And if I am on that team in one of these lineups and I combine it with 2 or 3 other offenses that are studs and then has awesome playoff weeks, like, that's the combination that could lead to winning $2 million. And that's the whole point. We're not here to get to just advance to week 15. We're here to win the $2 million. That's what we're working for. So how do you do this? It sounds good in practice, but then you get in your draft and you're like, well, how the hell am I going to put all these guys on the same team? So what I like to do is after my first 2 picks, I'm going to say these are the teams I'm stacking. So most of the time I'm going to be stacking with players that with the teams of the players that I drafted in the first 2 picks. Ones that I tend not to do it with, like if I take a Malik Neighbors team, I'm not really stacking Giants with him. I think he's kind of like a guy that is an absolute stud in an environment where the rest of the team is probably going to struggle. He's an outlier in that. So he's a guy that I might not want to stack. I've stacked him a few times, but it's just hard to stack when you don't know if Russell Wilson's going to be the guy in week 17. Um, so that's one that I don't do often. But say I'm at the end of the draft, at 11, 12, somewhere in there. Maybe I go like one that I've done a few times that I like, but it's kind of hard because they both have week 8 buys. But um, I would go Brian Thomas and I'll go Amon-Ra St. Brown. Now, now I'm going to stack both the Lions and I'm going to stack the Jaguars. And I'm also going to consider, I'm definitely going to at least get some players from the Colt and from the Vikings because the Lions play the Vikings in week 17 and the Colts play the Jaguars in week 17. Now, I don't necessarily have to stack out those whole teams, but I'm going to want a few pieces here and there just because we saw that if that team goes up, if a QB is top 5, 70% of the time they have an opponent that is top 10 at their position. So I'm going to make sure that I give myself an opportunity to pick the guy that's in that 70%. Now, I'm going to just go, you could both on DraftKings and an Underdog, you can search the team name so you can just like start typing in Jaguars and it'll pull up all the guys that are Jaguars. And then I'm just going to put all those guys in my queue. I'm just going to go through and I'm going to select all those guys. Now, it sucks on DraftKings because DraftKings just puts them in your queue how you select them. So in the order that you select them. On Underdog, it does the same thing, but you have the option to go into your queue and then just click the ADP button, the ADP filter, and it'll sort everybody by ADP. So you can have like, you can go and click 4 teams worth of people and put them in your queue and then just have them all sorted. On DraftKings, it's a kind of a pain in the ass. You'll spend like 2 rounds trying to sort everybody back into ADP order so you can see how they're coming up. But I like to just have them all queued. That doesn't mean that I'm going to be drafting every single one of these guys in the order from the queue. I'm not only drafting guys from these teams, but I want to be, there's going to be some key guys that in my story that I'm going to want to have. And sometimes it makes sense for me to reach for those guys. I want to be able to see where they are right now in ADP and when my next pick is and evaluate, is there a chance that they fall to me at the next pick? Or do I need to reach for them and take them here to build out this story that I have? And in some cases, it makes sense to reach. In other cases, you're going to risk it. And like I said, part of the luck in these best ball drafts is getting those guys to fall to you, right? Like you're going to have to catch some breaks in the draft. So I'm going to take risk in the draft sometimes. If I need a guy to fall like 3 or 4 spots, but there's somebody in round 3 that I think is a great value that I want to take, I'll take that guy that's a great value that doesn't match my stack. And then I'll take that risk and hope that the guy I need falls to me in round 4. If he doesn't, I'll adjust. But that's what I'm pursuing is that outcome. And when it hits, it feels awesome. When it doesn't, it sucks, obviously, but we'll just adjust our story from there. Plan where you're taking your QBs, right? Like we need to see where their ADP is, and then look at what picks you have when you look at the board. Now, sometimes you're going to have to reach to make sure that you stack your guys up with them. Other times, like I talked about through the Joe Burrow scenario, you can be aggressive and let them fall to you. But it sucks when you have like I've had plenty of scenarios where I've been building a Jaguar stack, and I have both Hunter and Trevor Lawrence, and Brian Thomas, and he's right around 130 with his ADP right now. And I don't take him at 124, hoping to get him at 132. And I think it's really likely because nobody else has Jaguars at that point. But I've had scenarios where that guy that just doesn't, understand that if he takes Trevor Lawrence unstacked and he's QB1, like he's not going to have the winning lineup. There's plenty of guys that don't understand that and they swoop in and they take him. It's a bummer, but it's worth it to take that risk to get that value in some cases and then get them to fall to you. And when it happens, it's awesome. When it doesn't, it's like, oh, that's a bummer. It's unlikely that this is my perfect winning lineup, but we're going to try to make the best of it. um, when we can. Now, another thing I want to do is I want to stack my late round sleepers to my QBs. Again, what I said earlier is lots of times those breakout players come from really good offenses, right? Like let's look at some guys that were late round picks last year that were absolute studs compared to their ADP, like a Jalen McMillan. He was on a really good offense last year. He went really late. If you stacked him with Baker, you had a guy for, you know, 5 weeks that was an absolute stud and was a stud through the playoffs. So I want to stack my late round sleepers with my QBs because if my QB goes off and there's that random guy that scores, when you look at DraftKings lineups for the weekly and you're like, how did that one random guy go off? Lots of times that random guy that goes off is tied to an elite quarterback that week. So it makes sense that when we're making those dart throws that we tie them to our quarterbacks. It gives us a higher likelihood of that guy booming. And even if he isn't a stud throughout the year, like say we take Jalen McMillan, but we have um, we have Mike Evans and we have Igbuka, and they're healthy all year long and they're studs. Uh, so McMillan doesn't have a really big year. He's still a guy that could randomly go off in week 17. So that's stuff that we want to keep an eye on, and it gives us a better chance of having that winning lineup in week 17. All right, a few things we don't want to do. We don't want to give up too much value and reach for a stack, especially in the first 8 rounds. So those first 8 rounds, like those are the better players. You're likely to get more studs out of there. We don't want to be reaching too far in those rounds because there's a lot of value there. We don't want to take pocket passes without a stack. We talked about this, but there's basically no scenario if they're QB1 in week 17 and you don't have anybody stacked with them that you're going to win. And don't wait too long to get a QB. Punting QB, it can work. Like if you punted and like your first QB was Michael Penix and then you went like Geno Smith, like there's scenarios where both those guys go off, but it's less likely. I prefer to have I either like to have two guys in the like 10th and 11th round and then one guy like in the 14th or 13th or so. Um, somewhere between 2 to 3 guys in that round 9 to round 14 range, or having one elite guy, one middle guy, and one kind of dart throw or late round QB. That's how I'm going to build it. But for the most part, I'm going to have 3 QBs. Occasionally, I will go 2 QBs. Like I've had some lineups where I'll go like Lamar and Brock Purdy. Like that feels pretty comfortable that one of those 2 guys will do well enough throughout the whole year that I won't really have a scenario in which I'm missing out on QB points. Like they'll probably one of those 2 guys is likely to be top 10 year round, or each week. So should be pretty good in those scenarios. But week 3 gives you 3 shots at having QB1 in week 17. And I think that that's a huge element of giving yourself the best shot at the 2 million. And even if you don't hit the 2 million, if you have QB1 in week 17, you're moving way up that leaderboard. You're putting money in your pocket by having that QB1. So I want to have multiple shots at having QB1 in week 17. All right, my friends, that is my breakdown of best ball strategy. Hopefully I didn't bore you too much, but get out there, get to drafting. Love to see your lineups. You can leave a comment here on YouTube, or you can send me an email at millimakermaniac@gmail.com. I'm going to be doing some more videos throughout the season. Just really enjoy doing this. So hopefully you guys got some value out of that, and we will see you soon. Adios, Maniacs. We'll see you later. What is up, Maniacs? I am Zach Barger, the Millie Maker Maniac, and today we're going to talk about best ball draft strategy. It is